So what I'd like to do today is, this is a big topic on the health benefits of ginger and turmeric. Lots of really great information out there. What I'd like to do today is just to give you a perspective both on what have been the historic uses of ginger and turmeric for health, and then what's some of the evidence that's out there that really it is healthful and that it actually does have an impact on certain health conditions. So I'd like to give you just a perspective on that, on the information that I'm going to provide you today. I hope it's not a little bit overwhelming. So ginger is from the ginger family, obviously. And this family is a family of perennial herbs with over 52 genera. And it includes both ornamental plants, spices, and medicinal plants. And amongst those spices are ginger and turmeric, but also curcumin and Thai ginger are part of this family as well. Historically, both ginger and turmeric have been used in Oriental medicine for centuries because of what had become their clinical health benefits through experience. And so we know that, for instance, ginger has been used to treat digestive orders, nausea, and morning sickness. As a matter of fact, ginger is well known for its antiemetic properties. In addition, it's been used in arthritic conditions, in general aches and pains, so it's known to reduce pain, headache, muscular discomfort, etc., common cold, and also inflammatory conditions. Having a hard time hearing? Similarly, turmeric has been used traditionally for multiple conditions, including respiratory conditions, and this includes asthma and allergies, liver disorders, inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. It's been used in the treatment of diabetic wounds as well as the control of diabetes, coughs, anorexia, gastrointestinal disorders. So both of these have been used for a multiple of health conditions. And if you're anything like me, if you're a skeptic like me, you might ask yourself, what are the effects, and is there true scientific evidence that these two spices have an impact on health? And I want to kind of convince you that yes, there's a lot of evidence out there that they do, and show you some of those mechanisms. So I'd like to start just quickly with ginger. I'll go through ginger a little quickly and then focus a little bit more on turmeric. But ginger has multiple therapeutic effects. The first two, well known of those, is antioxidants, as an antioxidant as well as an anti-inflammatory. As an antioxidant, ginger functions to remove reactive oxidative species and decreases lipid oxidation, and that's been shown in scientific evidence. As an anti-inflammatory, gingerol, which is a component of ginger, has an inhibitory effect on prostaglandins, which are inflammatory in nature, thereby decreasing inflammation. In addition, ginger decreases inflammatory cytokines. In that way, it decreases inflammation. It has antiplatelet activity. Again, it impacts those enzymes that increase platelet aggregation and thereby thins your blood, decreases platelet aggregation. As a hypoglycemic and hypocholesterolemic agent, there are animal studies showing that animal diabetic models, that through the supplementation of curcumin, glucose levels as well as insulin levels can be decreased.
I'm so sorry. Just get that a little closer to.
Why don't I pull this way so I can? Oops.
Some of them can't hear in the back.
Gosh, so you could hear Reza, but you couldn't hear me. I gotta talk louder. So as a hypoglycemic and hypocholesterolemic, so consumption of curcumin decreased glucose levels in mouse models, not in human models, in mouse models, and cholesterol. I talked already about its impact on headaches, but let me talk just a minute about its anti-tumorigenic properties. So both ginger and turmeric have evidence that they are anti-carcinogens, both in the initiation, the proliferation, and the spreading of cancers. And there is evidence of the mechanisms by which they do that. Potentially, the effect of ginger on oxidative states as well as inflammatory states is partially how they may influence tumorigenesis, or the development of cancers. Finally, ginger has been shown to be an antimicrobial, so decreasing E. coli and Pseudomonas infections, including H. pylori, which we know is the bacteria that causes ulcers and is also implicated in colon cancer development. So this is a picture of what are the active non-volatile phytochemicals that are found in ginger. So ginger has both volatile and non-volatile components that have an impact. The volatile components are what give ginger its nice smell. The non-volatile components, including gingerol and chargol and paradol, are what give it its pungent, kind of hot flavor. And these are also felt to be the components that have the therapeutic benefits in ginger. 6-gingerol is the most prominent of these non-volatile phytochemicals, and it's found in the fresh form. When ginger is dried, a lot of that gets converted to what are the chargol form of this non-volatile components. So what about the toxicity and the safety of ginger? And I'm going to talk just a little bit about toxicity and safety. In today's pharmaceutical age, many of these elements that are found in ginger, and particularly in turmeric, are being isolated and concentrated. And so although we know just from the traditional use of both ginger and turmeric that they really are safe and have minimal side effects when used in that form, as we begin to isolate and concentrate these and put them in pills and things like that and consume them in really high quantities, it is important to do investigation related to, as we concentrate those and consume those in those kind of quantities, what kind of toxic effects might those have. But in general, there's minimal toxicity with the consumption of ginger, even in relatively concentrated forms. So even in studies where 400 milligrams of ginger were consumed 3 times a day over a period of time, the only adverse side effect from that was some mild diarrhea. Now, in higher concentrations, 6 grams of ginger daily over a period of time, you did begin to see things like heartburn and gastric irritation with ginger, but in general, they are pretty darn safe. One caveat, there are some animal studies that show that ginger tea given to pregnant mice decreased viability of the offspring. So there's even though it's used for nausea and has traditionally been used for morning sickness of pregnant women, there's a recommendation of caution with consumption of ginger in the tea form in women who are pregnant, just because of that. So now I want to move on to talk about turmeric, and I'm going to give a little bit more detail just to give you a spattering of what is the scientific evidence of the metabolic effects of turmeric. So turmeric, similar to ginger, is an antioxidant and an anti-inflammatory. It has anti-carcinogenic or tumorigenic properties. It impacts bacterial infection and fungal infections, as well as being thrombosuppressive, anti-arthritic, and cardioprotective. I'm going to go into just a little bit more detail with turmeric. So the active components of turmeric are the curcuminoids that are found in turmeric. These are found in the yellow-orange portion, colored portion of turmeric. And there are 3 major curcuminoids, the most prominent of those being curcumin, and the other 2 dimethoxycurcumin and bis-dimethoxycurcumin in lesser quantities. These were first isolated way back in 1815, so these aren't newly discovered, and these are polyphenolic compounds. Curcumin and curcuminoids are stable in acid pH, and when they're in acid pH, that's when they get the yellow color. When they're put into a basic environment, neutral to basic environment, it'll turn brown, and then they are more susceptible to oxidation and degradation. So at lower pHs, they're more stable. So what are the molecular targets that have been found that to give those therapeutic benefits that we talked about in curcumin? There are multiple molecular targets. There are over 1,700 scientific publications talking about the impact of curcumin and its health benefits. So a lot of research out there on this, not so much in humans, but mostly in vitro and in vivo studies. But what are some of the molecular targets? Transcription factors. So those factors that actually transcribe your genes into functional proteins. Inflammatory cytokines, enzymes and kinases, as well as genes regulating proliferation and apoptosis. I am going to just go through some examples of this, and the reason I'm doing this is to show you, one, the extent of the evidence that's out there, and then also the multiplicity of molecular targets of curcumin. So just to review quickly, transcription factors regulate the expression of genes, and many transcription factors are associated with cancers, the development of certain cancers. And you can see just from this listing, curcumin has been shown to impact multiple of these transcription factors. But one of the most important probably is the NF-kappa beta. Irregular activity of NF-kappa beta is associated in multiple cancers, and curcumin has been found to impact that NF-kappa beta expression, which may be a way in which it can inhibit cancer formation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Inflammatory cytokines. So we all know and we've heard inflammation is damaging to our system. Of course, inflammation is natural in our system. It has its purpose, but when inflammation in our body is chronic, it can cause multiple damages in our system, including can be carcinogenic. And so curcumin has been found to directly impact or inhibit the production of certain inflammatory cytokines, thereby decreasing the impacts of inflammation. I've given you one example there, which is curcumin's inhibition of TNF-alpha. TNF-alpha is kind of a classic inflammatory cytokine, but TNF-alpha is important for the upregulation of NF-kappa beta, which I just spoke of. So when that transcription factor, NF-kappa beta, is activated, it produces certain proteins that then can be carcinogenic if they're running amok. Curcumin, through its decrease or inhibition of TNF-alpha, actually can deregulate or downregulate NF-kappa beta. So just an example of one of the mechanisms that's been investigated of the molecular functions of curcumin. Another example, in mouse models of nephrectomized mice, so they're going into renal failure, part of that process is an increase in inflammatory cytokines, including TNF-alpha and IL-1 beta. In this mouse model, supplementation of curcumin decreased those cytokines and thereby decreased the progression towards renal failure. So just an example of how the molecular targets and activity of curcumin on our inflammatory cytokines can then impact our health or chronic disease. Again, we have multiple enzymatic systems in our body with multiple functions. Curcumin has been studied. What's its impact on certain enzymatic systems, and what is that impact on health? Just a couple of examples. So curcumin has been found to actually upregulate an enzyme called heme oxygenase 1. Heme oxygenase 1 actually decreases inflammation. It gets rid of the heme, which can be very damaging to our body. But it is also implicated in the development of renal failure and glomerular nephritis, inflammation of the glomeruli of the kidney. Curcumin is found to increase that enzyme, which decreases inflammation and thereby decreases the fibrosis that can occur in kidneys under that condition. Similarly, curcumin inhibits an enzyme called farnesyl pyrophosphate. I don't want to get down too much in the weeds, but farnesyl pyrophosphate activates what is called RAS proteins. And RAS proteins are highly implicated in the development of cancers. As a matter of fact, defects in RAS proteins are found in over 90% of pancreatic cancers. Currently, curcumin is being studied in how it can impact pancreatic cancer, so this is kind of important. So by inhibiting farnesyl pyrophosphate, curcumin actually can also inhibit RAS proteins that, again, have kind of run amok and hopefully decrease progression or development of pancreatic cancers and other types of cancers. Just a couple more. So kinases are another kind of enzymatic system. But kinases regulate tumor cell growth. When kinase systems run awry, you can have uncontrolled cell growth and proliferation, which really is the definition of a cancer. And so curcumin also impacts certain of these kinase systems that are highly associated with the formation of cancers and the proliferation of cancers. One of those systems is this mitogen-activated protein kinase system. Curcumin has been found to be able to inhibit those protein kinase activities, and in the context of a cell that has some irregularities in that system that could lead to cancer development, that's a very important function of curcumin. Similarly, this EGF receptor kinase, EGF is epidermal growth factor receptor. Particularly in breast cancer, EGF receptors are found to be overexpressed in over 30% of breast cancers, and curcumin is found to inhibit the activity of these epidermal growth factor receptors, which potentially can be a cause of both the development of breast cancer as well as the expansion of breast cancer. So these are all scientifically investigated molecular mechanisms of curcumin and how it might be impacting, in this case, the development of cancer or the spread of cancer. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about curcumin's potential role in pathways, gene pathways of apoptosis or cell death, cell invasion, and cell adhesion, all of which, again, are very important in terms of cancer. So, again, through curcumin's action on TNF-alpha, it can actually reduce the production of something called adhesion proteins. So when cancer cells want to move from one place to the other or metastasize, they need to use cell adhesion molecules to do that. And we've found that curcumin can impact the production of these adhesion molecules through its action on TNF-alpha. One final way that, as it relates to cancer, P53 is an intranuclear transcription factor. So it's one of those factors that actually transcribes genes and makes genes function. P53 is important for sensing DNA damage in cells and repairing that damage, or having the cell kill itself if that damage can't be repaired. And so when P53 doesn't work, that's when you can get some cancerous cells. As a matter of fact, P53 is one of the most frequent genetic mutations that are seen in cancer cells and cancer development. And we find that curcumin has an impact on P53, can actually activate P53 activity so that it can do its preventive work in terms of cell cancer proliferation and growth. So those are just kind of a detailed of. I'm hoping you can see that curcumin has been shown to have a multiple molecular targets and in multiple ways can impact health. I focus a lot on cancer here, but I'm hoping you're getting the idea that there's a lot of evidence out there for curcumin's role in health. Now I just want to speak briefly about its bioavailability, because curcumin is not really very bioavailable. When we eat it, it's not well absorbed, and there are enzyme systems to kind of break it down and destroy it, both in our intestines and our liver. And so when we consume curcumin, and actually I've given the example here, curcumin consumed at levels of 3 to 12 grams daily only showed nanomolar levels of curcumin in the plasma or in your blood. So it's not really well absorbed. And so there's a debate out there, if it's not well absorbed and you can't really accumulate it in your system, how these effects, these molecular effects we're seeing, do they really work in the human body? Are they really going to be that impactful? So you should take that into consideration. That's some of what is driving the isolation of curcumin and its concentration in pill format to try to give greater and greater concentrations so that you can get more into your system. Of course, that carries the risk of increased toxicity as well. But one natural way of increasing the bioavailability of curcumin when you consume it is by combining it with something called piperine. And piperine you all know very well, and you probably consume it regularly, it's found in pepper. And so many curries which contain turmeric as one of their primary ingredients also contain pepper, which really increases the absorbability and bioavailability of curcumin. And so for centuries now, we've actually been doing what naturally what we now have discovered with science. So that little graph there just shows you the absorption of curcumin. The lower line is without pepperin, and the top line shows the dramatic increase in absorption when you combine it with pepperin. And that's just combining it with pepper. They're also doing other things like putting it in nanoparticles and putting it in micelles to increase absorption. But this is the most natural way that we'd find on our grocery shelves to increase bioavailability. So what about safety and efficacy? A couple of times now I've talked about the safety. We talked about safety of ginger. Turmeric traditionally has been consumed in the way it's currently being consumed. It's very safe, no toxicity levels. But as we begin to try to concentrate how much we consume to have impacts on our health, then we need to be a little bit cautious. So there have been some clinical studies on the toxicity of curcumin, consumed as curcumin, not as turmeric, and up to 8 grams daily for 3 months. Consumption in humans, there was no toxicity found, and those were in healthy individuals. There are studies that try to test to see what's the maximal dose somebody can tolerate before they start experiencing some side effects. They've gotten up to 12 grams of consumption, and then it's just way too bulky to consume that amount. But at 12 grams, you do begin to see some experiences of diarrhea and rash and headache and things like that. There have been studies that have shown some increase in liver enzymes. So as we begin taking formulations where they've taken specific types of curcuminoids and put them in pills and given them to people. So as you're thinking about consumption of curcumin, I'm hoping you're convinced that it actually does have some scientific and metabolically based positive impacts on your health. But there's always the caveat. We really don't know when you start concentrating it and taking in high quantities what might be the negative effects. But to date, consuming it in normal ways, it really is very, very non-toxic. That's the good news. So just to sum up, I think ginger and turmeric absolutely have scientifically based health impacts, something that's been known for centuries, but now we're trying to prove it for those of us who are skeptics. And they have those health impacts through multiple metabolic targets that have been identified through research. They are generally safe to consume if you're consuming it as a spice or even increasing your consumption through juicing, which we've started in my family to juice turmeric and ginger and consume it that way. Minimal toxicity. And I think I'll end there.